The sun barely crested the horizon when Marcus Webb guided his garbage truck down Primrose Lane, the jewel of Riverside Heights. This wasn't just any neighborhood. This was where doctors, lawyers, and tech executives displayed their success through manicured lawns and imported luxury cars. And every Tuesday and Friday morning, Marcus collected their trash. What the residents of Primrose Lane didn't know, couldn't have possibly imagined, was that the man in the orange vest, the one they sneered at and complained about, owned more property in this city than most of them would accumulate in 3 lifetimes. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to where this story really begins. Dad, why do we have to do this? The question came from Tommy Webb, 16 years old and thoroughly mortified. He sat in the passenger seat of the garbage truck, wearing the same orange safety vest as his father, dreading the moment when someone from his school might drive by. Marcus glanced at his son, a slight smile playing at his lips. We've been over this, Tommy. Summer job. Character building. But Dad, but nothing. You wanted that car for your birthday. You're going to learn what real work is first. Tommy slumped in his seat, pulling his cap lower over his face. He didn't understand. How could he? At 16, all he knew was that his father was a garbage collector. They lived in a modest 3-bedroom house on the other side of town, and apparently, he was expected to follow in those same footsteps every summer until college. What Tommy didn't know, what Marcus had deliberately kept from him, was that the modest 3-bedroom house they lived in was just one of 47 properties Marcus owned across the state. The garbage collection job? That was real, but it wasn't necessity. It was philosophy. Marcus had been collecting garbage for 23 years. He'd been a millionaire for 19 of them. The truck rumbled to a stop in front of 2847 Primrose Lane, the Henderson residence. 5 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a 3-car garage housing a Tesla, a Mercedes, and a Porsche that Mrs. Henderson drove exclusively to yoga class. Marcus hopped down from the truck with the practiced ease of decades of repetition. Tommy reluctantly followed, grabbing the first bin at the curb. "Wait," Marcus said, pointing. "That one's got yard waste mixed with regular trash. We need to sort it. Can't we just— No shortcuts, son. Do it right, or don't do it at all." As they separated the bins, the front door of the Henderson house swung open. Catherine Henderson emerged, her yoga outfit probably costing more than most people's weekly grocery budget, her face twisted in that particular expression of disgust reserved for the service worker she considered beneath her notice. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Do you realize what time it is?" Marcus checked his watch. 6:47, ma'am. Well within the city's approved collection hours. "It's inconsiderate," she snapped, walking down her pristine driveway. Her gaze swept over Marcus, then landed on Tommy. Her eyes widened slightly, recognition flickering. "Is that Tommy Webb from Riverside High?" Tommy's face burned crimson. "Oh my God," Catherine continued, a cruel smile forming. "Does everyone at school know your father is a garbage man?" She said the last 2 words with particular venom, as if they tasted foul in her mouth. Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, we're just doing our job. If you have a complaint about the service—" "My complaint is that I have to wake up to the sight and smell of garbage collectors when I pay premium property taxes to live in a premium neighborhood." She turned back to Tommy, her smile widening. "Your father must be so proud, passing down the family business. I'll make sure to tell Chelsea you say hi. She's been asking about you." Chelsea Henderson, Tommy's crush since freshman year. The humiliation was complete. Catherine turned on her designer heels and walked back inside, her laughter echoing across the perfectly manicured lawn. Tommy stood frozen, his hands clenched into fists. "Dad, "Let it go," Marcus said quietly. "Finish the route." "How can you just finish the route?" The steel in his father's voice left no room for argument. They worked in silence for the next hour, collecting trash from houses that cost more than most people would earn in a decade, receiving contempt from people who thought net worth equaled human worth. But something had shifted in Marcus Webb that morning. A decision was crystallizing, one that had been years in the making. It was time for Primrose Lane to learn a very expensive lesson. To understand what happened next, you need to know how Marcus Webb became the man willing to collect garbage while sitting on a fortune that would make most of these residents weep with envy. Marcus grew up in the same Riverside Heights neighborhood, but in the before time, before the tech boom, before the gentrification, before Primrose Lane became a monument to excess. His father, Robert Webb, had been a garbage collector for the city. His mother, Sarah, cleaned houses. They weren't poor, exactly, but they weren't comfortable either. Marcus remembered being 12 years old, sitting at the kitchen table while his parents discussed whether they could afford to repair the water heater or whether they'd have to cold shower their way through another winter. He remembered his father's hands, permanently darkened by grime that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. He remembered his mother coming home exhausted, her knees aching from scrubbing other people's floors. Most of all, he remembered the day his father came home with a black eye and 3 broken ribs. "What happened?" his mother had gasped, rushing to Robert's side. "Resident on Brighton Street," his father said, wincing as he lowered himself into a chair. "Complained about the noise. I apologized. Tried to work quieter. He said I was too slow. Started yelling. Then pushing." He paused, breathing carefully. Then his security guard got involved. "Did you call the police?" Robert laughed bitterly. "Yeah. You know what they said? Said it was my word against theirs. And residents of Brighton Street don't typically assault city workers without cause. Suggested maybe I'd been drinking on the job." 12-year-old Marcus watched his father, his strong, proud father, sit at that kitchen table with tears running down his face. Not from the physical pain, from the humiliation, from the powerlessness, from the crushing knowledge that in this world, some people mattered and some people didn't. That night, lying in bed, Marcus made a promise to himself. He would never be powerless. He would never be invisible. And one day, he would have enough money that no one could ever treat him, or his family, like they were disposable. But here's where Marcus's story takes its first unexpected turn. Most people who escape poverty want to erase every trace of where they came from. They change their names, their accents, their zip codes. They pretend they were never that scared kid at the kitchen table, watching their father cry. Marcus went the opposite direction. He decided he would become wealthy enough to have power, but would never forget what it felt like to be powerless. And the way he would remember? He would keep doing the job that society deemed worthless, even after he no longer needed the paycheck. Marcus was good at exactly 2 things in high school: mathematics and stubbornness. The mathematics came naturally. Numbers made sense in a way that people didn't. You could predict them, manipulate them, make them work for you. While his classmates struggled with algebra, Marcus was teaching himself calculus from library books. The stubbornness, that was inherited. When Marcus decided something, hell itself couldn't change his mind. His high school guidance counselor, Mr. Peterson, called him in during junior year. "Marcus, your test scores are exceptional," Peterson said, shuffling papers on his desk. "Have you thought about college?" "Can't afford it." "There are scholarships, financial aid. My parents need help now, not 4 years from now." Marcus kept his voice level but firm. "I start at the sanitation department next summer. Same as my dad." Peterson leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with the sort of pitying look that made Marcus's skin crawl. You're making a mistake. You're bright enough to do anything. Don't throw your life away." That phrase, "throw your life away," echoed in Marcus's head for weeks, as if the only life worth living was one that met Mr. Peterson's definition of success, as if his father's life, spent in service to his community, was somehow wasted. But Marcus did make one concession. At night, after his shifts at the sanitation department, he went to the public library. He devoured every book on investing, real estate, and business he could find. He read about leverage, compound interest, market cycles, and distressed asset acquisition. He was 19 years old, working full-time collecting garbage when he made his first investment. The house at 847 Maple Street was a disaster. The previous owner had died alone, and by the time the body was discovered, the property had deteriorated to the point where most investors wouldn't touch it. "You want to buy this?" The real estate agent, a woman named Jennifer who clearly thought Marcus was wasting her time, gestured at the boarded-up windows and the lawn that had become a jungle. "Do you have any idea what the rehabilitation costs would be?" Marcus had already calculated them down to the last nail. He'd spent 3 months researching this property, learning about the deceased owner's estate, the legal complications, the neighborhood trajectory. While everyone else saw a teardown, Marcus saw something else. He saw that Maple Street was 6 blocks from where the city had just approved a new light rail station. He saw that 3 nearby blocks had already been rezoned for mixed-use development. He saw that every property owner on this street was sitting on a future gold mine and didn't know it yet. Most importantly, he saw that he could buy this disaster for $47,000, nearly everything he'd saved from 3 years of working double shifts. "I'll pay cash," Marcus said. "Close in 2 weeks." Jennifer's expression shifted from condescension to surprise. "You're serious?" "I'm always serious." The day Marcus Webb became a property owner, his father drove him to the courthouse to file the deed. Robert Webb looked at his 22-year-old son with a mixture of pride and concern. "You sure about this, boy? That's every penny you've got." "Not every penny," Marcus replied. "I kept back $3,000 for renovations." $3,000? "Marcus, that place needs at least 20. "Then I'll do most of the work myself, and I'll do it nights and weekends after my regular shifts." Robert studied his son's face, seeing the determination there. "You're crazy, you know that?" Marcus grinned. "Probably. But I'm crazy with a plan." For the next 8 months, Marcus worked his collection route during the day and renovated 847 Maple Street at night. He learned plumbing from YouTube videos. He taught himself basic electrical work. He discovered he had a knack for drywall and painting. He also learned that the physical exhaustion of working 18-hour days was nothing compared to the mental exhaustion of having your entire future riding on a property that everyone else thought was a disaster. There were moments, many of them, when Marcus wondered if he'd made a catastrophic mistake. At 2 a.m., covered in drywall dust, staring at a plumbing leak he couldn't figure out how to fix, he questioned everything. But stubbornness is a superpower when properly applied. 14 months after Marcus bought 847 Maple Street, the light rail station opened. Property values in the area increased by 30% in 6 months. Marcus sold the house for $127,000. He turned $47,000 into $127,000 in just over a year. After taxes and expenses, he'd netted about $60,000 in profit. But Marcus didn't celebrate, didn't buy a new car, or take a vacation. Instead, he rolled every penny of that profit into his next purchase, then the next, then the next. And he kept collecting garbage. People who knew Marcus in those early years all remember the same thing, the questions. "Why are you still working sanitation?" his friends asked. "You've got rental income now. You could quit." "Why do you drive that old truck?" the women he dated asked. "You could afford something nicer." "Why don't you tell people?" his mother asked, when Marcus had quietly paid off her mortgage. "Let them know what you've accomplished." Marcus's answer was always the same. Because the work isn't finished yet. But that wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was more complicated, tied up in that memory of his father crying at the kitchen table, in the lesson that wealth without purpose was just numbers on a screen. Marcus had developed a philosophy, one that would guide every decision he made for the next 2 decades. Real wealth isn't about displaying it, it's about deploying it. He watched his coworkers spend their raises on bigger TVs and newer cars, trapped in the cycle of working to afford things that didn't actually improve their lives. He watched the residents of Primrose Lane accumulate luxury items like trophies, confusing consumption with achievement. Marcus did the opposite. Every dollar he earned went into acquiring more assets, more properties, more streams of passive income. His lifestyle barely changed, even as his net worth climbed into 6 figures, then 7. By the time he was 30, Marcus owned 14 properties. His annual passive income exceeded $200,000. And still, every morning at 5 a.m., he put on his orange vest and collected garbage. "You're the richest poor person I've ever met," his mother said one Sunday dinner, shaking her head with affectionate exasperation. Marcus smiled. "Or the poorest rich person, depending on your perspective." Sarah Chen was the first person who understood. They met at a city council meeting, one of those tedious affairs where residents complain about potholes and parking regulations. Marcus attended because he made a point of understanding local governance. Zoning laws and infrastructure investments drove his property decisions. Sarah was there for different reasons. She'd just moved to the area, starting a job as a financial analyst at a downtown firm, and wanted to get a sense of the community. During the public comment period, a resident stood up and launched into a tirade about how the sanitation department was ruining the character of premium neighborhoods with their early morning noise pollution. The speaker was, naturally, from Primrose Lane. Marcus listened to the complaint with his usual impassive expression. He'd heard variations of this speech 100 times. But Sarah? Sarah raised her hand. "Point of order," she said, her voice cutting through the room. "Are we seriously debating whether garbage collection, a necessary municipal service, should be restricted because some residents find it aesthetically displeasing?" The Primrose Lane resident sputtered. "We pay premium property taxes, and in exchange, you receive premium services," Sarah interrupted, "including regular garbage collection. If you'd prefer to let your trash pile up for aesthetic reasons, I'm sure that could be arranged." The room erupted in laughter. The council president banged the gavel for order. Sarah sat down, her expression serene. Marcus found himself smiling. After the meeting, he approached her in the parking lot. "That was well done," he said. She turned, surprised. "Are you from the sanitation department?" "I work for them, yes, Marcus Webb." He extended his hand. She shook it. Sarah Chen, financial analyst, apparently with strong opinions about garbage collection rights. Apparently. They talked for 30 minutes in that parking lot, then over coffee the next day, then dinner the following week. Sarah was different from anyone Marcus had dated before. She worked in finance, understood compound interest and asset appreciation in her bones. But more than that, she got it, the philosophy that drove him. "You're building an empire in silence," she said, 3 months into their relationship as they reviewed his property portfolio spreadsheet. "That's actually brilliant. Most people think it's crazy. Most people will spend their entire lives chasing the appearance of wealth instead of wealth itself." She looked up from the laptop, her eyes bright. "You're doing the opposite. You're invisible by choice." "Invisible with increasing power," Marcus corrected. "The best kind." They were married a year later. Small ceremony, no flash, no preteens. Sarah kept her job for 3 more years, until their combined real estate portfolio was generating enough passive income that neither of them technically needed to work. But Marcus kept collecting garbage. And Sarah? Sarah became his strategic partner, analyzing markets and identifying opportunities with the same razor-sharp intelligence that had first attracted him. Together, they were unstoppable. Tommy was born when Marcus was 33. The birth was complicated. Sarah spent 2 weeks in the ICU, touch and go, while Marcus sat by her bedside and prayed to a God he wasn't sure he believed in. They both survived. But something shifted in Marcus during those 2 weeks of uncertainty. He'd built his empire with the singular focus of a man who had nothing to lose. But now, he had everything to lose. A wife he loved more than he'd thought possible to love anyone. A son who would depend on him for everything. "I need to make sure Tommy never experiences what I experienced," Marcus told Sarah, holding their newborn son. "Never feels powerless." "Agreed," Sarah said. "But how?" That question would haunt Marcus for the next 16 years. See, here's the problem with being a self-made millionaire who continues to live like a working-class person. Your kids have no idea. They grow up in a modest house. Their parents work regular jobs, and they assume this is all there is. Marcus and Sarah had long debates about this. Should they tell Tommy about the wealth? Give him access to it? Or was there value in letting him grow up normal? They compromised. Tommy would grow up in middle-class comfort, but without knowledge of the extent of his parents' wealth. When he was old enough, when he'd proven himself, they would reveal the truth. But that meant Tommy grew up thinking his dad was just a garbage collector. A job that, by the time Tommy was a teenager, had been culturally coded as low status, something to be embarrassed about. Marcus watched his son struggle with this, watched him deflect questions about what his parents did for a living, watched him become increasingly resentful of the summer job requirement, not understanding it was a test of character, not economic necessity. "He's ashamed of you," Sarah said one night, after another argument with teenage Tommy about the summer garbage route. "Of us." "I know." "When are you going to tell him?" "When he's ready to understand." "And when will that be?" Marcus didn't have an answer. How do you teach someone the value of money when they've never lacked for it? How do you instill work ethic when every privilege has been quietly provided? How do you pass down the lessons of powerlessness to someone you've protected from ever experiencing it? These questions kept Marcus up at night more than any property investment ever had. While Marcus grappled with fatherhood, his real estate empire continued its relentless expansion. By the time Tommy was 10, Marcus owned 37 properties. By Tommy's 15th birthday, 47. But here's what made Marcus different from most real estate investors. He was patient, surgical. While others rushed to flip properties for quick profits, Marcus played the long game. He'd identified Riverside Heights as ground zero for future development a decade before it happened. While the area was still considered transitional, real estate code for poor, Marcus quietly acquired property after property, always paying cash, never taking on debt that could threaten his holdings during market downturns. He bought the abandoned factory on Commerce Street for $200,000. Everyone said he was crazy. 10 years later, it was worth $2.1 million. He bought the murder house on Beacon Hill, the site of an infamous triple homicide that had tanked property values for blocks around it. People crossed the street to avoid walking past it. Marcus bought it for $83, held it for 7 years while the neighborhood forgot, then sold it for $445,000. He bought the strip mall that everyone said was obsolete in the age of online shopping. Marcus converted it into mixed-use residential commercial space, with apartments on top and trendy restaurants below. The property now generated $47,000 in monthly rental income. Property by property, year by year, Marcus built his empire. Conservative estimates put his net worth at $7.3 million by the time Tommy was 16. But that was just counting property equity. Factor in rental income, appreciation, and strategic partnerships, and Marcus Webb was comfortably into 8-figure territory, all while wearing an orange vest and collecting other people's garbage. But let's talk about Primrose Lane specifically, because this is where our story pivots from biography to confrontation. Primrose Lane had been on Marcus's radar for 15 years. Back when Tommy was born, the neighborhood was nice but not extraordinary. Solidly upper middle class, professionals, families, the kind of people who worked hard and lived well without unnecessary ostentation. Then the tech boom hit. Suddenly, Riverside Heights became Silicon Valley adjacent. Tech executives and startup founders, flush with stock options and acquisition money, started moving in. Property values tripled in 18 months. The old residents either cashed out or became paper millionaires. And the culture changed. Where once there had been community, now there was competition. Where there had been neighborliness, now there was one-upmanship. The Homeowners Association, which had previously concerned itself with reasonable matters like snow removal and street lighting, became a weapon wielded by status-obsessed residents to enforce conformity. Marcus watched this transformation with growing disgust. These weren't people who'd built anything. They were people who'd gotten lucky, confused their stock grants with actual achievement, and now lorded their newfound wealth over anyone they perceived as beneath them. And who did they perceive as beneath them? The service workers who made their comfortable lives possible, the garbage collectors, the landscapers, the house cleaners, the delivery drivers. People like Marcus. The irony wasn't lost on him. Marcus probably owned more property in Riverside Heights than any 3 Primrose Lane residents combined. But because he chose to keep collecting garbage, because he refused to signal wealth in the approved ways, they treated him like he was invisible at best, contemptible at worst. For years, Marcus endured the casual contempt with the patience he'd cultivated over decades of delayed gratification. He'd learned that the most powerful response to disrespect wasn't confrontation. It was strategic patience. But the incident with Catherine Henderson and Tommy, that was different. That crossed a line. You can disrespect Marcus. He'd developed immunity to that particular poison. But humiliate his son? Hurt the one person Marcus would sacrifice anything to protect? That demanded a response. And Marcus Webb, garbage collector and secret real estate mogul, was uniquely positioned to deliver one. The day after the Catherine Henderson incident, Marcus did what he always did when planning a major move. Research. Most people think revenge is hot-blooded, impulsive, driven by rage. Marcus knew differently. Real revenge, the kind that actually lands, is cold, calculated, and thoroughly researched. It's not about making yourself feel better. It's about engineering a specific outcome. Over the next 2 weeks, while continuing his regular garbage collection route, Marcus quietly assembled a dossier on Primrose Lane. He started with the Homeowners Association. Every HOA is governed by covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs in the industry. These documents dictate everything from approved paint colors to acceptable landscaping choices. More importantly, they define the HOA's governance structure and financial obligations. Marcus obtained a complete copy of Primrose Lane's CC&Rs. He studied every clause, every provision, every loophole. And then he smiled. See, Primrose Lane's HOA had been established in 1987, back when the neighborhood was first developed. The original CC&Rs were written hastily, without the legal sophistication of modern HOA documents. And they contained several very interesting provisions. First, any property owner who acquired a majority stake in the HOA's common areas automatically gained board presidency and decision-making authority. Second, the HOA's common areas, including the community clubhouse, the park, and the retention ponds, were legally separate parcels that could be purchased independently of residential properties. Third, there was no provision limiting who could purchase these common areas. In other words, if someone, say, a garbage collector who'd spent decades quietly accumulating capital, were to purchase the HOA's common areas, they would effectively control the entire homeowners association. Marcus's smile widened. Next, Marcus needed to understand the financial health of every property owner on Primrose Lane. Were they as wealthy as they appeared? Or was it leverage and debt behind those luxury cars and renovated kitchens? This is where Sarah's financial expertise proved invaluable. Together, they pulled public records, property tax assessments, mortgage filings, lien records, bankruptcy filings. They cross-referenced social media posts. You'd be amazed what people reveal about their financial stress online, with professional networking sites. The picture that emerged was fascinating. Of the 47 homes on Primrose Lane, 31 carried mortgages exceeding 70% of their current property value. 8 were owned by people who'd refinanced multiple times, pulling equity out to fund their lifestyles. 3 were in pre-foreclosure, though the owners were hiding it well. The median household income on Primrose Lane was $340,000. Impressive, until you factored in that the median debt burden was $1.2 million. These people weren't wealthy. They were leveraged to the hilt, one market downturn or job loss away from financial catastrophe. Catherine Henderson? She was among the worst. Her house carried a $1.7 million mortgage. Her husband's tech company had gone public 3 years ago, but the stock had declined 70% since its peak. Public records showed 2 tax liens and a judgment from a credit card company. The Hendersons were living on borrowed money and borrowed time, desperately maintaining appearances while drowning in debt. Marcus felt no sympathy. When you build your social status on tearing others down, you forfeit to the Primrose Lane. HOA's common areas were technically owned by a trust, established when the neighborhood was first developed. The trust's management had been passed around over the years, eventually landing with a property management company that had zero emotional attachment to Primrose Lane. The management company saw the common areas as a minor nuisance, a $2.1 million yacht that generated minimal income but required constant maintenance and liability insurance. Marcus made them an offer. $2.4 million, close in 30 days. The property management company jumped at it. On July 15th, Marcus Webb became the sole owner of every common area in Primrose Lane. The clubhouse, the community pool, the parks, the walking trails, the retention ponds, and, most importantly, the decorative entrance gates and landscaping that gave the neighborhood its prestigious identity. The residents had no idea. The transaction was buried in county records that none of them bothered to check. They were too busy posting Instagram photos of their luxury cars and vacation homes to notice that ownership of their beloved community had just changed hands. Marcus didn't announce his purchase, didn't send letters or make proclamations. He simply waited. Because the real power move wasn't buying the HOA, it was what came next. 3 weeks after Marcus's purchase, every Primrose Lane resident received a letter from the new HOA management. The letter was professionally formatted, written in the bland corporate language typical of HOA communications. It informed residents that due to deferred maintenance issues and updated insurance requirements, the HOA board was implementing a special assessment. $45,000 per household, due in 90 days. The reaction was immediate and explosive. "This is highway robbery! Catherine Henderson shrieked at the emergency HOA meeting Marcus had called. "We already pay monthly dues. How can you possibly justify $45,000? Marcus stood at the front of the community clubhouse, wearing not his garbage collection uniform, but a perfectly tailored suit. The transformation was striking. The same man these residents had sneered at for years now looked like he belonged in a boardroom, but none of them recognized him. Why would they? Garbage collectors were invisible, beneath notice. They'd never actually looked at his face. The assessment is justified by actual costs, Marcus explained calmly, projecting a PowerPoint presentation. The retention ponds require environmental remediation, $670,000. The pool needs complete resurfacing, $340,000. The clubhouse has structural issues that must be addressed, $520,000. The entrance gates need replacing, $180,000. I can provide detailed bids from licensed contractors if you'd like to review them. This is ridiculous, another resident shouted. We've never had problems before. That's because the previous management deferred necessary maintenance, Marcus replied. I'm simply addressing issues that should have been handled years ago. The alternative is potential liability for the HOA if, say, someone is injured due to structural defects. The threat was implicit, but clear. Pay up or risk being sued when the inevitable injury occurs. I want to see the contracts, demanded James Morrison, a lawyer who lived on Primrose Lane. I want to verify these numbers. Of course, Marcus said smoothly. I'll provide complete documentation. But I should inform you that under Section 7.3 of your CCNRs, the HOA board, which currently consists of me as majority stakeholder, has unilateral authority to levy special assessments for health and safety issues. This vote isn't subject to resident approval. The room erupted in angry protests, but Marcus simply waited, his expression neutral, until the noise died down. You have 90 days, he repeated. Failure to pay will result in a lien being placed on your property, with interest accruing at the maximum rate allowed by state law. Marcus had expected anger, protests, legal threats. What he hadn't expected was for someone to actually recognize him. It was Chelsea Henderson, Catherine's daughter, ironically. The same girl Tommy had been crushing on, the one his mother had weaponized to humiliate him. Chelsea was home from college for the summer. She'd been at the HOA meeting, recording it on her phone, probably for TikTok content, Marcus assumed. As residents filed out, furious and defeated, she approached him. Mr. Webb, she said hesitantly. Marcus turned, his expression neutral. Yes, you're Tommy's dad, aren't you? There it was, the moment of recognition. I am. Chelsea's face cycled through several emotions. Confusion, embarrassment, realization. But my mom said you were a garbage collector, Marcus finished. I am. Still work the route every Tuesday and Friday morning, in fact. But this, she gestured around the clubhouse at the professional presentation that was still displayed on the screen. How? Those are two separate questions, Chelsea. How am I a garbage collector and also control your HOA? Or how did a garbage collector afford to buy your HOA? She stared at him, speechless. Marcus softened slightly. Chelsea wasn't her mother. She'd been polite to Tommy at school, even friendly. She didn't deserve cruelty. I collect garbage because I choose to, he said. I own property because I'm good at investing. The two aren't mutually exclusive. Your mother assumed they were, which is why she's about to pay $45,000 for her arrogance. Is this because of what she said? To Tommy. Marcus considered lying, considered taking the high road and claiming this was just business, nothing personal. But he'd built his empire on truth, even uncomfortable truth. Partly, he admitted. Your mother humiliated my son because she thought she was better than us. She thought wealth gave her the right to treat service workers like they were disposable. This is her education in the difference between looking wealthy and being wealthy. Chelsea's eyes were wide. Oh my God, you're going to destroy her. No, Marcus corrected. I'm going to make her pay what she actually owes. If that destroys her, it's because her financial foundation was built on debt and appearances, not actual wealth. I'm just revealing what was already true. He paused, then added, "Tell Tommy I said hi, and that I'm proud of him for finishing the summer garbage route, even after what happened." Chelsea nodded slowly, still processing. As she walked away, Marcus heard her mutter, "Holy shit." By tomorrow, the entire neighborhood would know. The garbage collector had bought their HOA. The man they'd dismissed and disrespected was now their landlord, effectively. And the irony was delicious. That night, Marcus finally told Tommy everything. They sat in Marcus's home office, a room Tommy had always assumed was just where his dad did paperwork. Now, looking at the filing cabinets full of property records, the multiple monitors displaying portfolio spreadsheets, the framed deeds on the wall, Tommy saw it differently. "So we're rich," Tommy said, still processing. "We're comfortable," Marcus corrected. "Rich implies we've stopped working. I'm still building." "But why didn't you tell me? Why make me work the garbage route if we don't need the money?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying his son. "What did you learn this summer? That people suck? That they judge you based on your job? That's one lesson. What else?" Tommy thought about it. "That work is work, I guess, whether people respect it or not." "Good. What else?" That Mom was right about the difference between looking rich and being rich." Marcus smiled. "Now you're getting it. Tommy, I made you work the garbage route because I needed you to understand something I learned the hard way. Real power isn't visible. It's not about impressing other people or winning their approval. It's about building something real, something that can't be taken away by reputation or appearances. Like buying Mrs. Henderson's HOA. Exactly like that." Tommy was quiet for a moment. Then, "Dad, are you doing this because of what she said to me?" Marcus met his son's eyes. "Partly. But mostly I'm doing it because people like Catherine Henderson need to learn that their cruelty has consequences. They go through life thinking they're money they don't even actually have, just credit limits and mortgages, gives them the right to degrade people. Someone needs to teach them otherwise. And that someone is you?" "That someone is us," Marcus corrected. "If you want to be part of it." Tommy grinned. It was the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from his son in months. "Hell yes, I want to be part of it." "Language," Sarah called from the hallway. "Sorry, Mom," Tommy shouted back. Then to Marcus, "So what happens now?" "Now? Now we see how many of them can actually afford the assessment. My guess? Less than half. And if they can't pay?" Marcus's smile was sharp. "Then we have a conversation about alternative arrangements." The 90 days passed like watching dominoes fall. Of the 47 Primrose Lane households, only 12 paid the special assessment in full by the deadline. 8 more negotiated payment plans with Marcus. He was reasonable about this, despite what they assumed. He didn't actually want to destroy people's lives. He wanted to teach them humility. But 27 households simply couldn't come up with $45,000. They were tapped out, leveraged to the breaking point, living on fumes and credit card float. Catherine Henderson was among them. Marcus received her call on day 87, 3 days before the deadline. "Mr. Webb," she said, her voice tight with humiliation. I need to discuss the assessment." "Of course. Would you like to meet at the clubhouse?" "I'd prefer somewhere more private." They met at a coffee shop downtown. Catherine showed up looking like she hadn't slept in weeks. The designer clothes were the same, but they hung differently on her now, like she'd lost weight from stress. She got straight to the point. I can't pay it. The $45,000. We don't have it. Marcus sipped his coffee, waiting. My husband's stock portfolio is underwater. We've refinanced twice. I've got credit cards maxed out. The mortgage payment is 3 weeks late. Her voice cracked. We're going to lose the house. Probably, Marcus agreed neutrally. Is that what you want? To make us homeless? Mrs. Henderson, I didn't make you anything. Your financial situation is the result of your choices, living beyond your means, confusing credit limits with actual wealth, spending on appearances instead of building real security. But the assessment is legitimate, Marcus interrupted. Every dollar goes toward actual repairs that your HOA neglected. I'm not padding the numbers. I'm not punishing you financially. I'm simply requiring you to pay what you actually owe. Catherine's face crumpled. Then what do I do? Marcus considered her for a long moment. This was the woman who'd humiliated his son, who'd sneered at him for years, who'd treated him like he was invisible because he wore an orange vest. He could destroy her. He had the power to do it, completely and legally. But revenge that destroys is ultimately empty. Revenge that teaches? That has value. Here's what I'll do, Marcus said finally. I'll waive the assessment for your household specifically, on one condition. Hope flickered in Catherine's eyes. Anything. You write a letter, a real one, not some corporate apology. You write to Tommy, explaining what you did wrong and why. You write about what you've learned about judging people based on their work, and you write about the difference between appearing wealthy and being wealthy. He paused. And then, you write a second letter to every service worker you've treated poorly over the years. The garbage collectors, the landscapers, the grocery store clerks, everyone you've dismissed because you thought you were better than them. Catherine stared at him. That's it? That's it. Do that sincerely, and I'll know if you don't. And I'll waive the assessment. Keep your house. Keep your lifestyle. Just be better. Tears were streaming down Catherine's face now. Why? Because my son asked me to, Marcus said simply. He said you made a mistake, but people deserve second chances. So this is yours. Catherine Henderson's letter to Tommy arrived a week later. Dear Tommy, I don't know if you'll believe me, but I'm writing this because I need to say it, even if you never read it. What I did to you was cruel. I used information about your father's work I considered beneath my notice, to hurt you in front of someone you cared about. I did it because I was small, insecure, and thought belittling others made me bigger. I was wrong. Your father is twice the person I am. He built something real while I was building appearances. He did honest work while I was borrowing money to pretend. He taught you values while I taught my daughter to judge people by their job titles. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. You and your father showed me more grace than I showed you, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that lesson. I'm sorry. Catherine Henderson. Tommy read it twice, then showed it to Marcus. Do you think she means it? I think she's starting to understand, Marcus replied. Understanding leads to meaning. Give it time. But it was Catherine's second letter, the one posted on Primrose Lane's community Facebook page. That really shocked the neighborhood. To every service worker I have disrespected over the years, I owe you an apology that I can never adequately make. I treated you as if your work made you less human, less worthy of respect. I complained about noise when you collected my garbage. I dismissed landscapers as if their labor wasn't real work. I spoke to delivery drivers like they were inconveniences, not people. I was wrong about everything. I have learned the hardest way possible that there is no correlation between wealth and worth. That the man I sneered at for collecting garbage has more financial security than I have ever had. that the work I dismissed as low class is the work that makes my comfortable life possible. I cannot undo my past behavior, but I can change going forward. And I can tell all of you that I'm sorry, I was wrong, and you deserved better. Catherine Henderson. The post went viral. Local news picked it up. Within a week, it had spread across social media, picked up by accounts dedicated to exposing HOA tyranny and class prejudice. Primrose Lane became famous, not for its wealth or prestige, but as the neighborhood where a garbage collector owned the HOA and taught them all a lesson in humility. Something interesting happened in the months following the assessment crisis. The residents of Primrose Lane, forced to confront their financial fragility, started making changes. 3 families downsized to smaller homes. 5 more refinanced to more manageable mortgages. The competition over luxury cars and renovations cooled considerably. But more than that, the culture shifted. People who'd never bothered learning their garbage collector's name suddenly made a point of saying good morning. Tips appeared for delivery drivers. The Facebook page, previously full of complaints about service workers, became a place where residents shared genuine appreciation. Marcus watched this transformation with quiet satisfaction. This was what real power looked like. Not domination, but demonstration. Showing people a mirror and letting them decide what to do with what they saw. Not everyone changed, of course. Some residents moved away, unable to adjust to the new reality, where the service workers they dismissed might secretly be wealthier than they were. Others doubled down, insisting Marcus was an anomaly, an exception that proved the rule. But enough changed that Primrose Lane became a different place. Not perfect, not suddenly egalitarian, but better. Marcus continued his garbage route. The work grounded him, reminded him of where he'd come from and why he'd built what he built. But now, Tommy worked alongside him, not with resentment, but with pride. "Dad," Tommy said one morning, as they loaded bins onto the truck. "Chelsea asked me out." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Henderson." "Yeah. She said she was sorry about what her mom did, and that she'd always thought I was cool, but she'd been too worried about what people thought to actually talk to me." Tommy grinned. "Guess things change." "Guess they do," Marcus agreed. They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Tommy asked the question that had clearly been bothering him. "Dad, are you going to keep doing this forever? The garbage collection?" Marcus thought about it. "I don't know. Maybe. Does it bother you?" "No," Tommy said, and Marcus could hear the honesty in it. "Actually, I kind of get it now. It's not about the work. It's about not letting other people define you." Marcus smiled. "Exactly. But Dad, when I take over the business, the real estate, I think I'm going to do something different. Maybe property management or renovation. Something I can build on top of what you've built. That's the point, son. Each generation takes what came before and makes it their own. I'd be disappointed if you just did exactly what I did." They finished the route in comfortable silence, father and son, garbage collectors who happened to own more property than most of their neighbors would accumulate in a lifetime. 5 years after the Primrose Lane incident, Marcus Webb stood at the podium of the Riverside Heights Community Center, accepting an award. The Distinguished Service Award, the mayor announced, goes to Marcus Webb for his decades of service to our city's sanitation department and his transformative impact on our community. The audience applauded. In the front row sat Sarah and Tommy. Tommy, now 21, finishing his business degree and already managing 3 properties in Marcus's portfolio. Chelsea Henderson sat next to him, holding his hand. Further back, Catherine Henderson applauded too, her face showing genuine warmth. She'd gotten a job as a financial counselor, helping people navigate debt and build real wealth. The irony of her journey wasn't lost on anyone. Marcus accepted the plaque, then turned to address the audience. 23 years ago, I started collecting garbage for this city, he began. People asked me why I continued, even after I no longer needed the income. The answer is simple. This work matters. The people who collect your garbage, who clean your streets, who maintain the infrastructure of modern life, they matter. And when we forget that, when we start dividing people into categories of worthy and unworthy based on their job titles, we lose something essential. He paused, looking out at the crowd. I didn't keep collecting garbage to prove a point or to teach anyone a lesson. I kept doing it because the work needed doing, and because I refused to let anyone else's opinion of that work define my worth. That's the real secret to wealth, not money or property, but knowing your value independent of external validation. The applause was thunderous. After the ceremony, Marcus stood outside with Sarah, watching the sun set over Riverside Heights. The city had changed so much in his lifetime. The neighborhood where he'd grown up poor was now filled with million-dollar properties. But some things hadn't changed. Tomorrow morning, he'd put on his orange vest and collect garbage. Not because he had to, not even to make a point anymore, but because the work grounded him, connected him to the community in a way that sitting in an office managing spreadsheets never could. Proud of you, Sarah said, squeezing his hand. Proud of us, Marcus corrected. We built this together. Think Tommy will keep the garbage collection going? Marcus laughed. God, no. He's already talking about property technology and digital real estate platforms. He'll take what we built and transform it into something we can barely imagine. That's good, right? That's perfect, Marcus agreed. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their city transform, knowing they'd been part of that transformation in ways most people would never understand. The garbage collector who owned half the neighborhood, the invisible millionaire, the man who'd proven that real wealth wasn't about being seen. It was about building something that mattered. And in the end, that was the only validation Marcus Webb had ever needed. For those who care about such things, here are the final numbers. Marcus Webb retired from active garbage collection at age 53, though he maintained ownership of his collection company for another decade. His real estate portfolio at retirement, 127 properties across 3 states, valued at approximately $47 million, generating $340,000 in monthly rental income. Tommy Webb took over management of the family holdings at age 25, expanded into commercial development, and doubled the portfolio's value within 7 years. Primrose Lane never had another special assessment. Marcus held the HOA for 5 years, then sold it back to the residents at cost, having made his point. Catherine Henderson became one of the city's most respected financial literacy advocates, speaking at schools and community centers about the difference between appearing wealthy and building real wealth. But the real legacy wasn't measured in dollars or properties. It was measured in the 37 people who came to Marcus over the years, asking how he'd done it, wanting to learn the principles that had transformed a garbage collector into a millionaire. To each of them, Marcus gave the same advice. Do work that matters. Live below your means. Invest the difference. Ignore what other people think. Build something real. Simple principles. Nothing revolutionary. But lived consistently over decades, they transformed lives. Because in the end, that's what Marcus Webb proved. That dignity doesn't come from what others think of your work. It comes from knowing your work matters and building something that endures. And that lesson, that simple, powerful lesson, was worth more than all the properties, all the wealth, all the revenge combined. The garbage collector taught a neighborhood to see clearly. And in doing so, he taught them what real wealth actually means.